everyone, I've got a real interesting find for you today. We're talking about a 1973 Chevy Nova that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist. Now, before you get too excited, let me give you the full scoop on this classic piece of American muscle. The seller's asking $10,000 for this Nova, and I've got to be honest, that's a pretty penny for what's essentially a project car. But let's break it down and see what we're dealing with here. Under the hood, you've got a 350 small block engine paired with a 350 automatic transmission. That's a solid combination that could really shine with some work. Speaking of work, this Nova needs it. The seller's upfront about it being a project they never got around to, and it shows. The car runs, which is a good start, but it's got its fair share of issues. Most notably, the transmission has a leak that'll need addressing sooner rather than later. Let's talk about the interior. It's a bit of a mixed bag. The dash and back seat are in decent shape, which is a pleasant surprise for a car of this age. However, the front bench seat has seen better days. There's a rip in it, and the seller recommends replacing it entirely. So, factor that into your budget if you're considering this Nova. Now, about the mileage. The odometer shows 60,000. But here's the kicker. It's rolled over. So we're actually looking at 160,000 miles or more on this classic. That's a lot of road time, but remember, these old Novas were built to last. The title is clean, which is always a plus when dealing with older vehicles. It's a gas guzzler, of course, but you don't buy a classic Nova for its fuel efficiency. Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. This 1973 Chevy Nova needs a lot of work. It's not the kind of car you're going to drive home and show off at the next car meet. But for the right person, someone with the time, skills, and passion for restoring classics, this could be an excellent project. You've got to go into this with your eyes wide open. The $10,000 asking price is just the beginning. You're going to need to invest a lot more in terms of time, money, and effort to get this Nova back to its former glory. But if you're up for the challenge, the end result could be truly spectacular. So, what do you think? Is this the kind of project you'd love to take on? Are you ready to breathe new life into this piece of automotive history? Or is it too much of a fixer-upper for your taste? Whatever your thoughts, I'd love to hear them. And remember, whether you're into pristine classics or challenging projects like this Nova, there's a place for every kind of car enthusiast in our community. 2. We're taking a look at a real gem, a 1966 Pontiac Tempest that's currently up for grabs at $9,500. Now, I've got to say, this one's got me excited, and I'll tell you why. First off, let's talk about condition. The seller claims it's excellent, and based on the description, I'm inclined to believe them. This Tempest underwent a full-body restoration back in 1998, which means it's had over 2 decades to settle into its restored state. That's usually a good sign. Any immediate post-restoration issues would have likely shown up by now. Under the hood, we've got a 326 cubic inch V8 engine. That's a solid power plant for these mid-60s Pontiacs, offering a nice balance of power and reliability. What's really impressive is that this Tempest comes with factory air conditioning, power steering, and power brakes. That's a pretty luxurious setup for a 66 model, folks. The odometer shows just 27,000 miles. Now, with a car this old, we always have to take mileage with a grain of salt. It could be 127,000 or even 227,000, but given the reported condition, it might actually be original. Either way, the low number is promising. Transmission-wise, we're looking at an automatic, which is great for cruising. It's a rear-wheel drive, of course, just as a classic American sedan should be. Now, the seller says it runs and rides great, which is music to any classic car enthusiast's ears. A good-looking car is one thing, but one that drives well too? That's the dream. One thing to note, this is a sedan, not the sportier coupe version of the Tempest. But don't let that deter you. These 4-door models have a charm all their own, and are often more affordable than their 2-door counterparts. Of course, I always advise potential buyers to see the car in person, get it up on a lift if possible, and maybe even have a trusted mechanic take a look. Even with a restoration, a 55-year-old car can hide some surprises. All in all, if this 1966 Pontiac Tempest is as good as it sounds, That $9,500 asking price could be a steal. It's a beautiful piece of American automotive history, and with its claimed excellent condition and desirable features, it could make for a fantastic weekend cruiser or show car. 3. We're diving into a real piece of American muscle car history, a 1981 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 that's currently up for grabs at $12,500. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this third-gen Camaro. First off, we're looking at a Z28 model, which is always exciting for Camaro fans. It's packing the original drivetrain with a 350 cubic inch V8 engine. That's a solid power plant that's known for its reliability and potential for upgrades. The seller mentions it runs and drives, which is always good to hear. Now, let's talk about the condition. The seller's been upfront that this isn't a full restoration, so don't expect a concours-level show car. However, they've put in some work to spruce it up. We're looking at newer interior, fresh paint in gray, and new rims. That's a good start for anyone wanting a nice driver without breaking the bank on a full resto. The transmission is automatic, which might disappoint some purists, but it makes for easy cruising. And of course, it's rear-wheel drive, as any proper muscle car should be. One thing to note, the seller doesn't mention the odometer reading. With a car this age, that's something you'll definitely want to check out in person. It could have high mileage, so keep that in mind when considering the price. Speaking of price, the seller is asking $12,500 but says they're open to offers and motivated to sell. That could mean there's some wiggle room in the price, especially if you spot any issues when you see it in person. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This Camaro isn't perfect. The seller admits it's not a full restoration, so you should expect some imperfections. It's described as a nice clean driver, which suggests it's in decent shape for regular use, but probably not ready for the show circuit without more work. All in all, this 1981 Camaro Z28 could be a great option for someone looking to get into the classic muscle car scene without breaking the bank. It's got some upgrades, the original drivetrain, and it's a desirable Z28 model. But remember, always inspect a car thoroughly before buying, and if possible, get a trusted mechanic to take a look. 4. We're diving into a real gem from the late 70s muscle car era, a 1978 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 that's up for grabs at $10,000. Now let me tell you, this one's got a story to it, and I think you're going to want to hear this. First off, let's address the elephant in the room. This isn't a fully restored show car. The seller is upfront about it being a running project, but don't let that scare you off. This Camaro has had some serious love and attention over the past 2 years, and a lot of the heavy lifting has already been done. Under the hood, we've got a GM Goodwrench 350 5.7 crate motor. That's a solid, reliable power plant that should give you plenty of that classic Camaro grunt. The transmission is a 700R4 with a Corvette servo and shift kit, which is a nice upgrade for better performance and drivability. Now, let's talk about the work that's been done. The list is impressive, folks. We're looking at a new suspension front and rear, including steering components, a new exhaust system, new tires and wheels, BF Goodrich TAs on trued and powder-coated rims, a rebuilt original Rochester 4-barrel carb, a new gas tank and fuel sending unit, and a B&M Quicksilver shifter. That's a lot of new parts. The odometer shows about 91,000 miles, which isn't bad for a car of this vintage. The seller claims it's mechanically sound and reliable, which is always good to hear. But here's where it gets interesting. This Camaro didn't pass smog, and it's currently on non-op status. That means you can't just drive it home. It'll need some work to get road legal again. The seller mentions an evap hose issue, which might be related to the smog failure. The interior needs restoration, and the exterior could use some paint and bodywork. So there's still work to be done, but remember, this is a project car, and a lot of the mechanical heavy lifting has already been tackled. One cool note, this Z28 comes with its original dealership paperwork, most of the build sheet, and even the original engine block. That's a nice touch for the enthusiasts out there. Look, I've got to be straight with you. This isn't a turnkey classic ready for the show circuit, but for someone looking to finish a restoration on a desirable 78 Z28, this could be a great opportunity. The $10,000 asking price seems fair, given the work that's been done. But remember, you'll need to budget for finishing the restoration and getting it road legal again. 5. We're diving into a real piece of Mopar history, a 1965 Plymouth Barracuda that's currently up for grabs at $12,500. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average 65 CUDA, and I've got to be straight with you about what we're looking at here. First off, this Barracuda is far from stock, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Under the hood, we've got a built 360 Mopar small block that's been seriously beefed up. We're talking aluminum heads, roller rockers, and KB forged pistons. The seller claims it's pushing over 400 horsepower, which is a significant bump from the original output. Paired with that is a built 904 automatic transmission with an auto valve body and a 3500 stall converter. This combo has apparently helped the car run as low as 12.38 in the quarter mile. That's moving. Now, let's talk about condition. The seller is upfront about this being a driver-quality car, not a showpiece. The paint job is described as having dings, chips, and scratches. It's still eye-catching apparently, but don't expect a Concours-level finish here. The body is said to be very solid with one exception. There's a bit of rust in the right lower quarter behind the rear wheel. That's something you'll want to address sooner rather than later to prevent it from spreading. On the plus side, it's got front disc brakes, which is a nice safety upgrade for a car with this much power. The seller describes it as very street-friendly, which is good news if you're looking for something you can actually drive and enjoy rather than just trailer to shows. The odometer shows 124,000 miles. But it's rolled over, so we're looking at 224,000 plus miles on this classic. That's a lot of road time. But remember, with all the modifications and upgrades, many of the wear items have likely been replaced. Look, I've got to be honest with you. This 65 Barracuda is not for the purist looking for an all-original numbers-matching example. It's a hot-rodded, modified muscle car that's been built for performance. If that's what you're after, this could be a blast. But if you're looking for a restoration candidate or a stock classic, this isn't it. At $2,500, you're getting a lot of performance for your money, but you'll need to be okay with a less than perfect exterior and the need for some rust repair. It's a driver, not a show car, and the seller is clear about that. 6. We're taking a look at a real-time capsule from the 80s, a 1984 Buick Riviera that's currently up for grabs at $7,500. Now, let me tell you, this isn't your average 39-year-old car, and I've got to say, I'm pretty impressed with what we're seeing here. First off, let's talk about condition. The seller claims it's excellent, and based on the description, I'm inclined to believe them. This Riviera has been garaged its entire life, which is music to any classic car enthusiast's ears. Garage-kept cars often avoid the worst of weather-related wear and tear, and it shows in this case. Under the hood, we've got a V8 engine. Now, in 1984, this would have been the 5.0L 307 CUN Oldsmobile V8, which was a solid, reliable engine. It's paired with an automatic transmission, making this a smooth cruiser. Interestingly, this Riviera is front-wheel drive, which was a big deal for a full-size luxury car in the 80s. The odometer shows just 79,000 miles, which is impressively low for a car of this age. That works out to about 2,000 miles a year. Clearly, this Buick has been used sparingly and treated as a special ride. Now, let's talk about the overall condition. The seller says it runs and drives excellently, and everything works great. That's a bold claim for a car pushing 40 years old, but if it's been well maintained, and the low mileage suggests it has, it's entirely possible. The interior is described as being in great shape, which is often a weak point in cars of this era. The exterior color is listed as brown, which was a popular choice for luxury cars in the 80s. It might not be to everyone's taste today, but it's period correct and likely in great condition given the car's history. One thing to note, the seller mentions they're the second owner. That's generally a good sign, as it means the car hasn't been passed around multiple times, potentially with varying levels of care. At $7,500, this Riviera isn't cheap for an '84 model, but if it's as good as described, it could be worth it for the right buyer. These cars aren't particularly common anymore, especially in this condition, and they're starting to gain appreciation as classics. Look, I've got to be straight with you. This isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea. It's not a high-performance muscle car or a ultra-luxury classic, but for someone looking for a well-preserved piece of 80s American luxury, this Riviera could be a real find. It's the kind of car that could be a comfortable, reliable classic driver or a potential show car for 80s enthusiasts. 7. We're diving into a real piece of early 70s American muscle, a 1972 Buick Skylark that's currently up for grabs at $15,000. Now, let me give you the lowdown on this classic Buick, and I promise to keep it real with you. First off, we're looking at a Skylark with a 350 cubic inch V8 engine, paired with a 350 automatic transmission. That's a solid powertrain combo for these early 70s Buicks, offering a nice balance of power and reliability. The seller mentions it's got a 4-barrel carb, which should give it a bit more punch than the standard 2-barrel setup. Now let's talk about condition. The seller claims it's excellent, but I've got to be straight with you. This Skylark is more of a work in progress than a fully restored show car. It's got some nice upgrades and a lot of work done, but there's still some finishing to do. The interior is new, which is a big plus. New interiors can really transform the feel of these old cars. The windows are tinted, and the trunk has been Kevlar'd, which is an interesting touch for sound deadening or perhaps rust prevention. On the exterior, most of the bodywork has been completed, but it's currently sealed in gray primer. That means you're looking at either getting it painted or embracing the primer look. It's sitting on Keystone wheels, which is a classic look, but the seller notes it needs tires soon, so factor that into your budget. Mechanically, it sounds like it's in good shape. The seller mentions a recent tune-up, fluid changes, and front-end alignment. They've also replaced the gas tank sending unit and fuel lines, which are common trouble spots on cars of this age. One thing to note, it was originally an AC car, but the compressor isn't installed, so if you want AC, you'll need to factor in the cost of completing that system. The odometer shows 122 on 174 miles, which isn't bad for a 51-year-old car. The seller says it runs, drives, and sounds great. I think they meant great, not great, which is always good to hear. Look, I've got to be honest with you. At $15,000, this isn't a cheap entry into classic car ownership. You're getting a car that's had a lot of work done, but still needs some finishing touches. It's not a turnkey show car, but it could be a great project for someone who wants a solid foundation to work from. 8. We're diving into a real gem from the late 70s muscle car era, a 1979 Pontiac Firebird that's up for grabs at $11,900. Now, let me tell you, this isn't your average '79 Firebird, and I think you're going to want to hear about this one. First off, let's talk about what's under the hood. This Firebird is packing some serious heat with a 400 cubic inch engine that's been transplanted from a '70 model. Now that's a significant upgrade from the stock engines of the late '70s. The seller mentions it's got 69 heads, an ISKI cam, and it's been bored .030 over. All that adds up to an estimated 400 horsepower. That's a lot of punch for a '79 Firebird. But wait, it gets better. This beast is mated to a Muncie 4-speed manual transmission. That's right, folks. We're talking about a proper muscle car setup here. If you love rowing your own gears, this Firebird's got you covered. Now, let's talk about condition. The seller describes it as good and mentions there's no rust, which is always a plus for a car of this vintage. They also call it a great driver, which suggests it's in good running condition. It's got factory air conditioning too, which is a nice comfort feature. The odometer shows 86,000 miles. But here's the catch. The odometer is broken. So we don't really know how many miles this Firebird has actually traveled. That's something to keep in mind and maybe ask the seller about. The exterior is described as brown, which was a popular color in the '70s. It might not be everyone's first choice today, but it's period correct and could look pretty sharp on a Firebird. Now, I've got to be straight with you. At $11,900, this isn't a cheap entry into classic car ownership. But you're getting a Firebird with some serious performance upgrades. It's not a numbers-matching collector's piece, but rather a modified muscle car that's been built for performance. One thing to consider, with this much power, you'll want to make sure the rest of the car, brakes, suspension, etc., has been upgraded to match. That's something to ask the seller about or have checked out if you're serious about buying. Look, this '79 Firebird isn't for everyone. It's not a stock, original classic, and it's not a fully restored show car. But for someone looking for a powerful manual transmission Firebird that they can actually drive and enjoy, this could be a blast. It's got that classic late '70s Firebird style with significantly more power than it left the factory with. Fine. We're diving into a real piece of 1950s Americana, a 1956 DeSoto Fireflight that's currently up for grabs at $12,500. Now, let me tell you, this isn't your average classic car find, and I've got to say, I'm pretty impressed with what we're seeing here. First off, let's talk about the condition. The seller is rating this DeSoto pretty highly across the board, and it sounds like they've got good reason to. The paint is described as a 710, which is pretty darn good for original 67-year-old paint. It's showing some patina, but that's to be expected and often desired in cars of this vintage. It adds character and tells a story. Now the interior is where this Fireflight really shines. The seller mentions it's just had a complete redo by SMS Fabrics, following the original factory specs right down to the seat belts and rubber floor mats. That's a big deal, folks. A properly done interior restoration can transform a classic car, and it sounds like no expense was spared here. They're rating it 9/10, which suggests it's nearly showroom fresh inside. Under the hood, we've got the original V8 engine. DeSoto was known for their powerful engines in the 50s, and the seller says this one still runs fine with good power and compression. They're rating the mechanical condition as 8/10, which is impressive for a car of this age. They've also just ordered a new water pump and fuel pump, so it looks like they're staying on top of maintenance. The odometer shows 97,000 miles, which isn't bad at all for a 67-year-old car. That's less than 1,500 miles a year on average. Now, I've got to be straight with you. At $12,500, this isn't a cheap entry into classic car ownership. But for a '56 DeSoto in this condition, with a freshly restored interior and solid mechanicals, it could be a fair price. These aren't as common as some other '50s classics, which adds to their appeal. One thing to keep in mind, while the seller says it's in great shape mechanically, any car this old is going to need ongoing maintenance and care. Make sure you're prepared for that if you're considering buying a classic like this. Look, this '56 DeSoto Fireflight isn't for everyone. It's not a hot rod or a muscle car. But if you're into 1950s American luxury cars, this could be a real find. It's the kind of car that'll turn heads at cruise nights and car shows, and with its good condition, you could actually drive and enjoy it rather than just trailer it around. 10. We're looking at a real interesting piece of '70s American iron, a 1973 Buick Centurion convertible that's up for grabs at $12,500. Now let me tell you, this one's got a story to it, and I've got to be straight with you about what we're dealing with here. First off, this Centurion is a convertible, which is always cool. These big, luxurious drop tops from the early '70s are getting harder to find, especially in decent shape. Under the hood, we've got the mighty 455 cubic inch V8. That's a lot of engine, folks, known for its smooth power delivery and torque for days. Now here's where things get interesting. The seller mentions that this car was stolen and then recovered. That's led to it having a salvage title, which is something you need to be aware of. Salvage titles can make insurance and resale tricky, so keep that in mind if you're considering this Buick. The odometer shows just 44,000 miles, which seems low for a nearly 50-year-old car. However, given its history, we can't be sure if that's accurate. Always take mileage claims on classic cars with a grain of salt. On the plus side, the seller says the body and interior are great. That's a big deal for a convertible of this age, as they often suffer from rust and wear. It's also got air conditioning and tilt steering, which are nice comfort features. But here's the catch. The seller admits it needs some TLC. They don't specify what kind of work it needs, but given the salvage title and its history, you should be prepared for some potential issues. It could be anything from minor repairs to more significant mechanical work. Look, I've got to be honest with you. At $12,500, this Centurion isn't cheap, especially considering its salvage title and unspecified needs. However, if the body and interior are truly in great shape and the 455 is running well, it could still be worth considering for the right buyer. This 73 Centurion convertible is not for the faint of heart. It's for someone who's willing to take on a project, deal with the potential headaches of a salvage title, and put in some work to bring this classic back to its former glory. If you're that person, and you've got the skills or the budget to pay someone who does, this could be a unique opportunity to own a piece of 70s luxury that you don't see every day. 11. We're diving into a real gem from the mid-60s, a 1966 Buick Riviera GS that's currently up for grabs at $12,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average classic car find, and I've got to say I'm pretty excited about this one. First off, we're looking at a genuine barn find here, folks. This Riviera has been tucked away in a warehouse for the past 8 years, which means it's been protected from the elements, but also sitting idle for quite some time. Now, let's talk about what makes this Riviera special. It's a GS model, which stands for Grand Sport. That means it's packing the big 425 cubic inch nailhead V8 engine. These engines are legendary for their torque and smooth power delivery. It's sitting on 17-inch Craigslist wheels, which give it a classic hot rod look. The seller has done some work to get this sleeping beauty running again. They've rebuilt the 4-barrel carburetor, cleaned up the radiator and added new coolant, replaced the fuel pump, and swapped out the spark plugs. They've also pre-oiled the cylinders and changed the oil and filter. That's a good start in waking up an engine that's been sitting for so long. The odometer shows 88,900 miles, which isn't bad for a 57-year-old car. Of course, with classics like these, it's always hard to know if that's the true mileage. Now, I've got to be straight with you. While the seller describes the condition as good, remember that this is a barn find. It's likely to need more work beyond what's already been done. The paint is listed as red, but don't expect a showroom finish here. These barn finds often need some cosmetic love. At $12,000, it's not cheap, but for a 66 Riviera GS, it could be a decent starting point. These cars are becoming increasingly collectible, especially the GS models. One interesting note, the seller mentions they have 2 other 66, 67 Rivieras for sale that need work, plus some complete engines with transmissions. That could be a gold mine for someone looking to restore one of these beauties. Look, this 66 Riviera GS isn't for everyone. It's not a turnkey classic ready for the show circuit. But for someone looking for a project car with tons of potential, this could be a great find. It's got the desirable GS package, it's been stored indoors, and some initial work has been done to get it running. 12. Let me tell you about this 1967 Buick Skylark that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $15,000. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This ride's got some charm, but it's also got a few issues that we need to discuss. First off, let's dive into the good stuff. This Skylark's sporting the original 300 CI V8 with a 2-speed automatic transmission, power steering, and brakes. The seller's had it for about 12 years, and it's been living the Colorado life. The body's in good shape with no rust, and the chrome's looking sharp. It's got a fresh paint job in a slick 1968 Lehman's Blue, done after a full media blast. They've even thrown in some Buick Grand Sport parts, including those hard-to-find chrome rear wheel trims and GS hood scoops. Inside, you've got recovered seats, a spruced-up headliner, and door panels. And those vintage Craigslist SS wheels, they're definitely eye-catching. But here's where I've got to keep it real with you. This Skylark's been sitting idle for the past 7 years, only driven about 50 miles. The rear's sitting a bit high due to oversized coil springs and those sweet Craigslist wheels. They're causing some rubbing issues. There's an oil pan leak to deal with, and a mouse left its mark on the armrest and headliner. The hood's showing some serious paint cracks too. The odometer's reading 62K, but let's be honest, who knows what the actual mileage is on this classic? The seller's throwing in some extras like the original paint can, color code, original Buick wheels, and an extra dashboard. So there you have it, folks. This 67 Skylark's got potential, but it needs some work. If you're up for a project and have $15K to spare, this could be your next adventure. Just remember, the seller's firm on cash only, no trades, no payments, and no lowball offers. If you're serious, give them a call and talk details before making the trip out to the Hotchkiss Paonia area. That's the scoop on this classic Buick, straight up and no sugarcoating. 13. Let's talk about this sweet 1978 Ford LTD that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $12,000. This is one of those rare finds that'll make any classic car lover's heart skip a beat. So here's the scoop. This LTD is a one-owner gem that's been lovingly cared for by Grandpa since day one. We're talking about a car with just 75,000 miles on the clock, which is incredibly low for a vehicle of this vintage. The seller claims it's in like-new condition, and from the description, it sounds like they're not exaggerating. This blue beauty has been garage kept since new, which explains why there's no rust to speak of. It's all original, making it a true collector's piece. Under the hood, you'll find the powerhouse V8 351 Cleveland engine, known for its performance. The seller says this LTD is extremely fast, but it's been treated gently, just weekend drives and car shows. One of the most impressive things about this LTD is its maintenance history. All preventive maintenance has been done on time since new, and it's just been fully serviced. The seller's even got all the receipts to prove it. They've also installed a brand new exhaust and a 4-barrel carburetor. Everything on this car is said to work just as it should, which is pretty rare for a vehicle over 40 years old. It's described as a turnkey car, meaning it doesn't need any work. Just get in and drive. Now, I always like to keep it real with you folks. While the seller doesn't mention any issues, it's important to remember that this is still a 45-year-old car. Even with excellent maintenance, there might be some age-related quirks that come with classic car ownership. However, the seller seems confident enough in its condition to say they'd drive it to Florida today. At $12,000, the seller believes it's priced fairly, and if the car is truly in the condition described, it could be a great deal for a collector or someone looking for a unique daily driver. So there you have it, folks. This 1978 Ford LTD seems to be a well-preserved piece of American automotive history. If you're in the market for a classic that's been babied its whole life, this might just be the ride for you. As always, I recommend seeing the car in person and maybe getting a professional inspection before making a decision. 14. Let's talk about this sweet 1966 Dodge Dart convertible that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $11,500. This little beauty is a trim model 270, and it's got some stories to tell. First off, let's appreciate that this Dart has been garage kept its whole life. That's a big deal for a convertible, folks. Under the hood, you've got the legendary 225 Slant 6 engine paired with an automatic transmission. Now, this isn't a tire-shredding muscle car, but that Slant 6 is known for its reliability and smooth operation. The seller's been taking good care of this Dart. We're looking at a freshly rebuilt carb as of this year, a rebuilt radiator from 2022, and new brakes all around from the same year. They've also replaced the steering knuckle, fuel pump, motor mounts, and manifold gasket in recent years. Back in 2010, they added a power brake booster with all new brake lines. That's a lot of maintenance, which is great to see on a classic like this. The power convertible top is working as it should, and it was replaced around 2005. The seller says it's still in excellent condition with a good window, which is impressive for a convertible of this age. All the chrome trim is intact, and you've even got the original factory wheel covers, service manual, CertiCard, and owner's manual. That's a goldmine for collectors. Now let's keep it real. This Dart isn't perfect. The speedo cable broke about 6 months ago and hasn't been replaced. The odometer reads around 45,000 miles. But given the age of the car, the true mileage is unknown. The interior could use some love too. It needs a new carpet kit, and the front seat has some tears in the vinyl. But here's the thing. This Dart seems to be a solid, well-maintained classic that's ready for cruising as is. Or if you're feeling adventurous, the seller suggests it could be a great candidate for a V8 swap to turn it into a sleeper. At $11,500, with all the recent work done and its overall condition, this '66 Dart convertible could be a great entry into classic car ownership. It's not a show car, but it's an honest, well-cared-for example of a cool piece of Mopar history. Just remember, with any classic car, there's always going to be something that needs attention. That's part of the fun. 15. Let's talk about this 1965 Cadillac Fleetwood that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $14,000. Now this isn't just any old car, we're talking about the pinnacle of 1960s American luxury here. This Fleetwood has seen 77,000 miles roll under its wheels, which isn't bad at all for a car pushing 60 years old. The sellers listed it in good condition, which is promising for a vehicle of this vintage. They're also claiming it's priced to sell, which might be true if it's as good as they say. Now, let's be real here. The description is pretty sparse. We're not getting a lot of details about the car's history, recent maintenance, or any potential issues. That's something to keep in mind. The seller's being upfront that it's a cash-only deal with no trades, and they've got the title in hand, which is always good to hear. What we do know is that this Fleetwood would have come with a massive V8 engine, probably the 429 cubic inch, 7.0L behemoth that was standard that year. It's got an automatic transmission, which would be the turbo hydromatic that Cadillac was using at the time. This powertrain was known for smooth, effortless power, perfect for cruising and luxury. The 1965 Fleetwood was a boat of a car, stretching over 19 feet long and weighing in at around 2.5 tons. It would have been loaded with luxury features for its time. Think power everything, air conditioning, and enough interior space to host a small party. But here's where I've got to keep it 100 with you folks. Without more information, it's hard to say what kind of shape this caddy is really in. These old luxury cars can be money pits if they haven't been well maintained. The complex systems that made them so luxurious when new can be expensive and difficult to repair half a century later. So, if you're seriously interested in this Fleetwood, you'll want to see it in person and give it a thorough inspection. Check for rust, especially in the frame and floor pans. Make sure all those power accessories are working. And definitely take it for a test drive to see how that big V8 and transmission are holding up. 16. Let's talk about this 1965 Ford Thunderbird that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $12,000. Now this isn't just any old T-Bird, the seller's claiming it's an absolute gem, and from the description, it sounds like they might not be exaggerating. First off, we're looking at a restored '65 Thunderbird in excellent condition. The odometer shows 68,699 miles, but given its age and the restoration, that number might not tell the whole story. Under the hood, you've got the beefy 390 Ci V8 engine, which was a popular choice for these cars. The seller mentions they've upgraded to an electric fuel pump from the original mechanical style, which is a smart move for reliability. One of the coolest things about this T-Bird is that it's been set up for comfortable daily driving. It's got air conditioning, which is a huge plus for a classic car, especially if you're in a warm climate. They've also added a Retro Sounds Bluetooth stereo, so you can cruise to your favorite tunes without sacrificing that vintage look. The seller says the car runs like a dream and provides a smooth, effortless ride. That's exactly what you want to hear about a luxury coupe like the Thunderbird. These cars were built for comfortable cruising, and it sounds like this one still delivers on that promise. Now, I always like to keep it real with you folks. While the seller's description is glowing, they don't provide a lot of specific details about the restoration or any potential issues. It would be worth asking about things like the condition of the body and undercarriage, any rust issues, the state of the interior, and details about the restoration work. At $12,000, if this car is truly in excellent condition as described, it could be a pretty good deal. The fourth-generation Thunderbirds are beautiful cars with their sleek jet-age styling, and they're becoming increasingly collectible. So there you have it, folks. This 1965 Ford Thunderbird sounds like it could be a great way to get into classic car ownership with a vehicle you could actually use regularly. As always, I'd recommend seeing the car in person and maybe getting a professional inspection before making a decision. If it checks out, you could be cruising in 60s luxury style in no time. 17. Let's talk about this 1981 Chevrolet Corvette that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $9,800. Now I've got to be straight with you. The seller's description is about as bare bones as it gets, which leaves us with more questions than answers. Here's what we do know. This 81 Vetta has only 39,000 miles on the odometer, which is impressively low for a car that's over 40 years old. It's got a clean title and an automatic transmission, which was pretty common for Corvettes of this era. The seller mentions they drive it sometimes but have no use for it, which could mean it's in running condition. Now, let's talk about what we don't know, because there's a lot. The seller doesn't mention the condition of the body, interior, or mechanical components. They don't tell us if it's been garaged, if it's all original, or if any restoration work has been done. We don't even know what color it is, or what engine it's packing. For those who might not be familiar with the 81 Corvette, these cars typically came with a 350 cubic inch, 5.7L V8 engine. It wasn't the most powerful era for the Corvette due to emissions regulations, but these cars still had that classic Corvette look and feel. The price of $9,800 could be reasonable if the car is in good condition, but without more information, it's hard to say if it's a deal or not. 81. Corvettes aren't typically the most sought-after models, but low-mileage examples in good condition can still command decent prices. Here's my honest take. If you're seriously interested in this Corvette, you're going to need to do some legwork. Call the seller and ask for a lot more details. Find out about its maintenance history, any known issues, and its overall condition. Better yet, go see it in person if you can. These cars can be prone to fiberglass body issues and electrical gremlins, so a thorough inspection is a must. Remember, folks, when a seller provides this little information, it's on you to do your due diligence. This could be a hidden gem of a Corvette, or it could be a project car in disguise. Either way, make sure you know what you're getting into before you hand over your hard-earned cash. 18. Let's talk about this sweet 1966 Ford Mustang that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $15,000. This isn't just any old pony car. We're looking at a rare Sprint model, and it sounds like it's in pretty great shape. First off, let's appreciate that this Mustang is rust-free. That's a big deal for a car that's pushing 60 years old. It's sporting the inline 6-cylinder engine, which might not be as glamorous as the V8, but here's the kicker. The seller says this particular car, by its serial number, has a bit more horsepower than the stock 6-cylinder from the factory. That's an interesting tidbit for you Ford history buffs. The odometer shows 107,000 miles, which isn't too bad considering its age. It's got an automatic transmission with a console, and the seller mentions that the trans has been professionally disassembled and resealed. That's good news for reliability. Now let's talk about condition. The seller's describing it as excellent, and they're backing that up with some specifics. They say the interior looks new with no rips or tears. That's impressive for a car of this vintage. The body panels are straight, the panel gaps are correct, which is often a good sign of a car that hasn't been in any major accidents. And the chrome is in excellent condition. It's even got excellent tires, a trunk liner, and some spare new parts. The car is white, which is a classic color for these Mustangs, and it's got collector plates, which is always a nice touch for a classic car. Now, I always like to keep it real with you folks. While this Mustang sounds like it's in great shape, it's always a good idea to see a classic car in person before making a decision. Check out those body panels yourself, inspect the undercarriage, and definitely take it for a test drive to see how that boosted 6-cylinder performs. At $15,000, if this car is truly in the condition described, it could be a pretty good deal. Early Mustangs are always in demand, and a well-maintained, rust-free example is getting harder to find these days. So there you have it, car lovers. This 1966 Ford Mustang Sprint model sounds like a great opportunity for someone looking to get into classic Mustang ownership. It's not a fire-breathing V8, but it's a rare model that seems to be in excellent condition. As always, do your due diligence, but this could be your chance to own a piece of Ford history. 19. Let's dive into this 1985 Chevy El Camino that's up for grabs on Craigslist for $9,500. This brown beauty is a bit of an oddball in the automotive world. Not quite a car, not quite a truck, but 100% cool. First off, we're looking at a V8-powered El Camino with an automatic transmission and rear-wheel drive. The odometer shows a surprisingly low 48,000 miles, which is pretty impressive for a vehicle pushing 40 years old. However, as always with older vehicles, take that mileage with a grain of salt unless there's documentation to back it up. The seller describes the condition as good, and they've done some work to keep this El Camino on the road. They've replaced the starter and put in a new front suspension, which was apparently a $1,200 job. They've also slapped on a new set of Cooper tires. That's all good news for potential buyers. But here's where I've got to keep it real with you folks. The seller admits there's still some work that needs to be done. They don't specify what exactly needs attention, which is a bit of a red flag. It could be minor stuff, or it could be something more significant. This is definitely something you'd want to ask about before making the trip to see the car. The 85 El Camino would have come with either a 4.3 LV6 or a 5.0 LV8 from the factory. Given that this one's listed as an 8-cylinder, we're looking at the V8 model. These weren't tire-shredding muscle cars by 1985 standards, but they still had decent power for cruising and light hauling. At $9,500, this El Camino isn't cheap, but it's not outrageous either if it's in genuinely good condition. These vehicles have a dedicated following, and clean examples are getting harder to find. However, given the unspecified work that still needs to be done, you might have some room for negotiation. So here's the bottom line, car lovers. This 85 El Camino could be a cool cruiser with a bit of utility thrown in. It's got low miles and some recent work done, which is promising, but there are still some unknowns about what additional work it needs. If you're seriously interested, you'll want to see this one in person, give it a thorough inspection, and definitely take it for a test drive. 20. Let's talk about this 1981 Lincoln Town car that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $11,500. Now, I've got to be straight with you. The seller's description is about as vague as it gets, which leaves us with more questions than answers. What we do know is that this town car is packing a V8 engine, which would be the 5.0L 302 cubic inch Windsor V8 that was standard for that year. It's got an automatic transmission and rear-wheel drive, as you'd expect from a full-size American luxury car of this era. The seller claims it's in excellent condition, which is promising for a car that's over 40 years old. Now here's where things get a bit interesting. The seller's description is, well, let's call it unique. They're clearly going for a bit of humor, but it doesn't give us much to go on. They say it's quite incredible and that they have more info on the car, given that they own it, but they don't actually provide any of that info. They're open to offers without seeing the car in person, which is an unusual approach. Here's what we don't know: the mileage, the condition of the body and interior, any maintenance history, or any specific features of this particular town car. These cars were known for their smooth ride and luxurious interiors, but without more details, it's hard to say what kind of shape this one is in. The 1981 town car was part of the model's 5th generation, known for its more squared-off styling compared to earlier models. These cars were big, comfortable cruisers, perfect for eating up highway miles in style. At $11,500, this could be a decent deal if the car is truly in excellent condition. However, without more information, it's impossible to say for sure. These cars can be prone to rust and electrical issues, so a thorough inspection would be crucial. Here's my honest take. If you're seriously interested in this town car, you're going to need to do some legwork. Contact the seller and ask for a lot more details. Find out about its maintenance history, any known issues, and its overall condition. Better yet, go see it in person if you can. Remember, folks, When a seller provides this little information, it's on you to do your due diligence. This could be a well-preserved piece of American luxury, or it could be a project car in disguise. Either way, make sure you know what you're getting into before you hand over your hard-earned cash.